Hey, hello, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series for the Bridge to Land, Water, Sky Living Lab project. My name is Megan. I'm part of the Bridge Communications team, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I wanted to start off by sharing our agenda for today quickly. So first on the list, we have our call to gather. So we begin each of our webinars with a call to gather, drumming and singing, to acknowledge the leadership of the Indigenous communities guiding this project, as the drum is considered a connection to the natural world. Together, drumming and singing are essential elements that help maintain Indigenous identity and cultural heritage. We will do a quick webinar protocol coming up next, and then our first bridge break, which is just an interactivity. And then I will introduce the speaker, and then we will get into the good stuff. And we'll end with a question and answer period after that. Okay, so our webinar protocol. I'll just go through this quickly. So please keep your microphone muted throughout. This webinar is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, just make sure that your camera is off. There will be closed captions available on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and enter any questions that you have throughout the webinar at any point in the chat, but we will address all of our questions at the end during the Q&A period. And last but not least, if any of the buttons are unavailable to you, you can click more and that you should be able to access them from there. All right. So today's webinar, Unlocking Indigenous Market Potential, will focus on some of the challenges that farmers face when bringing their products to market in Canada and how to overcome these obstacles, with a special focus on the potential of Indigenous markets. So our first bridge break today, I'm very curious just to hear from you guys what interested you and brought you to the webinar today. So you can either access this by using the QR code in the corner, or you can join at slido.com to answer this question. There will be a few more throughout the webinar as well. So if you keep your screen open once you've logged in, or not logged in, but entered into it, it will keep going to the next poll for you. So you shouldn't need to do anything after that. So yeah, can't wait to see. So far, we have a few that are interested in the topic and just wanted to learn more. Awesome. Oh, a new producer. Awesome. Okay. So it looks like a lot of people today are just really interested in the topic and want to learn more, which is awesome. But we do have a few new producers and current producers as well on here that are interested to get into the food market. Awesome. Okay. And now we'll move on. So we are so excited to have Brenda Tjaden with us today to discuss our topic, Unlocking Indigenous Market Potential. Brenda is the founder of Prairie Roots and a passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture. Brenda began her career as a grain trader in 1997. In 2004, she founded an innovative grain marketing firm, leveraging a model from her master's thesis to maximize farm profits. Prairie Roots focuses on farmland management, market development, and the economic nuances of modern agribusiness. With 25 years in the field, Brenda has shared her expertise through courses, keynotes, and industry conferences. Her keen insights span commodities, carbon pricing, and food supply chains. And now, without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome to Brenda. We are so thrilled to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much for having me. This is a derivative of a presentation that I was pleased to provide at the Indigenous Ag Summit in Regina a few months ago, and we've taken it into a slightly different angle. So if you were there and now you're here, we've got a much more focused bit of content, and thanks to these lovely hosts, much more lively and colorful slides. And so You don't spend 30 years staring at spreadsheets and studying economics in order to become a technical creative whiz when it comes to presentations. So I'm really happy to have been able to work with Megan and Maddie to bring this presentation to light, because it's a very exciting topic. The food system today is made up of combination of Walmart, big box grocery stores, Amazon. It's really a big, efficient, monolithic machine that a growing number of consumers are not really satisfied with. It works. It works the way that it was designed. But I think, we can all agree that food safety, food sovereignty, food security, food nutrition, the environmental impact of food, there's not what we would call, total success on all those attributes today. And more the members of society who eat food 3 times a day, most of them, if they're fortunate enough to be able to, are looking for something different. So that creates what we call market potential. That there's buyers out there looking for and additional values, on top of what they see on a package. So you pick up a package of pasta, you can see the nutrition facts table, you can see the ingredients. As we will talk through, all of the information that you see on a package is there by regulation when you're buying it in a commercial grocery store. So that has to be replicated to a certain degree in order for anyone to be selling food. But today we're going to talk specifically about the value proposition of Indigenous-led food brands. Thanks again, just so much to Bridge to Land, Water, Sky for bringing me into work on this project. It's really been a great learning experience for me, and a great just feels good to be able to contribute. And so we're going to talk about the example of bison into farm direct consumer markets, because it's pretty complicated, like to sell meat. If you take your garden produce to a farmer's market, you don't have to do any labeling. You can sell it however you want. But when you are taking live animals and turning that into wrapped cuts of meat and selling it to members of the public, it's the opposite. There's quite a lot of heavy duty regulations that must be followed in order for your business to continue. So the realities that we're talking about here are related to not getting shut down by public health inspectors because you're not following the rules. There's also some really important sort of ownership to take on with respect to the value proposition of marketing. And there's different channels that work to different degrees, or that are appropriate depending on the stage of your business. So we'll talk about sales, marketing, and all of that within the regulations here. And so, yeah, I guess I've done a couple small projects for the Bridge to Land, Water, Sky project this past year. And we'll come back to this at the end, but part of the mission and the objective here is to create more opportunities for everyone to engage with this project. There's a lot of awareness, a lot of learnings, a lot of tricky problems being tackled around how to have farmland be managed in a way that is appropriate with the community's values. And so it's just to say, we really encourage everyone to don't just end it here, keep on top of what the project's progress is being made, and don't hesitate to reach out. So with that, let's move to the next slide, please. So regenerative agriculture, you may have heard, it doesn't really mean anything, or there's no set definition. And it's true that you can have a harder time putting your finger on a specific description of regenerative agriculture, especially if you compare it to something like certified organic. Certified organic foods have that label on them because they have complied with a set of standards and they've completed audits, and so they're allowed to carry that label. There's no sort of broad-based regenerative agriculture claim right now, because it's more about connecting to a story of regeneration on the land that the farm used to raise these products. So the biodiversity in the soil, the nutrient cycling, water cycling between plants and soils, the benefits of beneficial insects and wildlife habitat on the land, and the integration of livestock, like all of those practices come together to essentially reverse the environmental harm that's been done through excessive tillage and agrochemical use, which kills off a lot of these beneficial organisms in a field environment. But they find it very easy to do that in a monoculture. So, these big, broad fields of corn and wheat and canola. Um, there's some damage happening both in terms of runoff of chemicals and then destruction of soil health when the land is farmed that way. So regenerative agriculture brings back diversity, and that happens in whatever way makes the most sense for the specific farm. So that's why there's no broad claim that's going to just sort of say it is or it isn't regenerative, because it's only going to regenerate the soil and the farm's ecosystem and the farm business if it's done in the context of that specific operation. And that takes into account the people that are managing it, the environmental resources that are around, and all kinds of other considerations. And so the beauty of it, though, is that it fosters a great connection. And when we can connect with the consumers that are looking to pay for these attributes in food, it's quite rewarding and fosters a very kind of strong long-term relationship between producers and eaters. And lots of great social and just feel good things can happen around that. So it's tricky, but it's not impossible. And again, it's about connection. So I just really quickly wanted to mention, because I get asked this question a lot about, if we're a beginning farm, or if we're growing our farm operation, or if we're kind of new to agriculture as a business or as a project, should we be looking at these carbon markets? Because there's companies out there that are chasing farmers to try to get them to sign on to a carbon trading platform. And that's kind of not the right, that's not really what we're doing here in regenerative agriculture. That's not something that you can connect with consumers. The carbon markets have literally failed to deliver on the um, ecological asset improvement signed, and it took 10 years for the carbon markets to fail, because that's when carbon projects tend to get audited. So, if, for example, there was a project in Africa that was going to avoid deforestation, they could project the related CO2 emissions reduction or avoidance that would be associated with that project. But then 10 years later, when they went and measured how much avoidance there actually was, these projects have all fallen very far short. So there's really not a lot of confidence in the carbon markets, for a good reason. And for that reason, they're not worth very much. So if somebody's saying, we'll pay $3 an acre, anywhere in that neighborhood, for you to participate in this program, it's totally not worth it. There's corporate programs, government programs that are out there that are worth far more, and they're a lot more rigid in their kind of support that they provide, and the way that they're quantifying the outcomes. So just in general, marketing regenerative agriculture has really very little to do with the carbon trading platforms that are being presented to farms today. Just thought that might be helpful, because I get asked that question a lot. Next slide. Okay, so we're here at our first sort of quiz, and so I will pass it over to Megan to walk you through how this one's going to work.
Yeah, so hopefully you still have it up on your phone or however you accessed it. If not, you can do the join at Slido or the QR code again. But we are just going to rank. Take your best guess. If you don't know, there's no wrong answers necessarily if you want to just take a guess. And yeah, we're just going to rank the following food sectors from easiest to most difficult to get your products into. There's 5 different options here. So some of them are a little easier and some are a little more difficult, depending what the situation looks like. Okay. We have a few number ones for farmers market, restaurants, and community institutional consumers. All right, changing a little bit. Boutique grocery retail seems to be one of the more difficult ones, it looks like, that people are saying. Okay, it's pretty mixed reviews though, I'd say, for 1, 3, 5. Oh, there we go. It's changing a little bit. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for participating in that. Okay, farmers market is the number one for easiest, looks like overall. And there we
Yeah,
go.
that's really fun watching those survey results come in. I've never used that app before, but it's pretty cool. So yeah, farmers markets are by far the easiest to get into, and they're that's kind of why they were created, right? So and they're no joke. Like there's been at least 20 years of steady double-digit growth in farmers market numbers and in farmers market sales every year for the last 20 years. You don't see that kind of growth in market segment very often. So if you can kind of be again, I'm sort of speaking to what I imagine is a common situation here within the audience, which would be a First Nations farm that is new or growing or is starting to just try to look at what all the different markets are out there, and it can you can easily um, be led to believe that grain elevators are the market. They're not. So it's the customers of grain companies that are actually driving market prices at grain elevators. Grain elevators are just handlers. They're just in the middle, buying and reselling commodities with really, no information whatsoever from their own internal um, intelligence groups about what consumers want and even what the markets want. You could also look at the futures market and say, okay, well, really, it's corn futures that drive all the other prices of crops. Again, it's not a perfect science. Futures markets involve a lot of speculators and investment funds that can create extra volatility in the prices. And then, of course, the futures price is not the price that you get paid; it is the cash price that you get paid, and that's different by what they call the basis, and the basis can be highly variable. It can be, in US dollars and Canadian dollars. It's just like those grain elevators and futures markets are guiding economies for the commodity world, but there's this whole other world that is growing a lot quicker, is way more fun to play in, and is fosters a much deeper, stronger, longer term connection from a farm to its market. And it really starts with the farmers market. And because there's so many consumers that are trying to connect with local farmers, that want to know where their food came from, that believe it tastes better, that it's healthier for them, they're interested in the story of how these foods were raised, they flock to the farmers markets. I know that because I'm one of those women who would go to the farmers market every Saturday. I just loved it. And I've since switched over to selling at the farmers market. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about going forward here is my experience in trying to build a farm to consumer wholesale business. So I do consulting work, and I write boring economic reports that are sometimes a little bit controversial on my Substack. I try to tackle a lot of the topics in modern agriculture that the mainstream media won't talk about. Like, you won't see my opinion in the Western Producer. You won't read about the things that I write about in the Manitoba Cooperator or the Country Guide. There's a interest in consumer level demand trends that is creating opportunities for small farms, for short supply chains, to satisfy consumer demand that is untapped. And so what that involves then is people are willing to pay more for food that they know where it comes from. So they go out of their way to places like the farmers market, or maybe they shop at boutique grocery retails, or maybe they'll go. We're going to talk a little bit about online sales, but it's actually quite a big topic, and so that would be the second easiest place to get food sold off of your farm would be online. But it's really something that you need to do a lot of research on your own, so online sales, farmers markets is a very logical place to start because you can test out your messaging with the customers. You can see if they're interested. This is actually a picture of my farmers market table. And I do have an online ordering page as well, but until we figure out how much supply we have versus how much demand there will be, the risk is falling short. Like, so when you're typically starting small. Maybe you start with 30 head of bison, maybe, that's a sizable amount. But unless you can supply ribeyes on a regular basis, grocery stores don't want to take the risk of carrying farm branded product, because if it runs out and their customers come looking for it, then the store looks bad for not having the products in inventory that they want. So until, ribeyes is just one example of a very popular steak cut, but until you've got enough of a critical mass of inventory and enough turnover to be able to always have those uh, products on hand, then it's going to be tough to get into a grocery store. Now when we're talking about First Nations communities, this can look so different, right? But the institutional market, so schools, elder care, even hospitals, like, they're really big users of food, and their food is just junk. They're feeding, really nutrient weak meals to vulnerable people. So they're very interested in this idea of having some better connection to more nutrient rich food. It's just that the supply chain in between institutional buyers and farmers is not there. And I'm not sure exactly what that question was that just came up, but I bet it's something like, is there an opportunity for farmers to create a co-op so that there always is that supply, or that it's easier to pull a critical mass of supply together so that we can be supplying it like larger institutional buyers? The short answer is maybe. That's not a very good answer, but just to say that in the history of the Western Canadian agriculture industry, the co-op model as a business model has failed over and over and over again, whether it's the Prairie Pool elevators or countless examples of abattoirs. Producer co-ops are a very difficult governance structure to get a business off the ground and have it continue for as long as we would need it to. Um, so co-ops are tough, but it's kind of the logical business model that people look at. There's just no precedent of success there. So that's something that I think would be really smart for another project like this to explore, is how could producers work together to create the supply of this nutrient dense, super flavorful, great for the environment, meat and other food products, so that we can satisfy consumer demand. But we're not there today. So what we're left with is, here's 5 little shapes of sales windows into the market that you can consider approaching with your line. Next slide, please. So what we call D2C, direct to consumer, is quite a bit different than the commodity marketing that mainstream agriculture is boxed into. So Cargill and JBS tend to control the whole, maybe even the global beef supply. Animals go from farms to these processing plants. There's only maybe 3 or 4 across Canada. They're massive. They typically employ temporary foreign workers or some other sort of a whole sort of community group that is imported into Canada for the sole purpose of doing these meat cutting jobs that a lot of Canadians aren't interested in. And from the farms, animals go through auction marks, resellers get them into these big plants, and then they're trucked all the way back across the country by the wholesalers, which is like Gordon Food Services, Cisco. There's only 2 or 3 of those wholesale companies too, and they bring all the food back into Loblaws and Safeway and Sobeys, etc. So um, it's quite efficient, and for that reason, it is tough to compete on price, but it's missing any story. Like, it's very well, it's all treated the same because that's the way to keep it cheap. Whereas the stories that come from, like farms that are doing everything they can to treat the animals well, and to just be good members of the community, and taking utmost care of the environment. Those are stories that people want, and they're willing to go out of their way to get that connection back to the land. They're also seeing additional benefits, like there's ways to reduce food waste. That's a whole market attribute in and of itself, is people that want food that is associated with less waste, because something like 40, some gross number of percentage of the food that we raise in the world that ultimately ends up in the landfill. That's a serious issue. um, but small brand, like brand marketing, D2C farm businesses, they also can offer feeding the community first. Now, this may be a bad example, but I sure love having a meat warehouse over, in an addition on my house. Like, I haven't bought meat from the grocery store now for the 3 years that I've been trying to start this business, and I've been eating the best meat that there is, and my kids absolutely love it. We're able to talk to the farmers all the time about different packaging. Can they line up the sausages better? Because we're using butchers and abattoirs in rural communities like, say Killarney, Manitoba, or Verdon, Winkler, places that are not selling directly to the same urban customers as what I am, and not having to sort of not having the opportunity to take their feedback into their products. So, the communication within the supply chain is just huge. The enjoyment of these food products is huge. It's cut my grocery bill more than in half, and it's created some new activities for us as a family. And so, don't underestimate the value in your business of free labor, especially if they're teenagers. It's just, put these kids to work, get them this new skill set. They can solve problems in food supply chains and in farming practices that, like, people my age, we just overthink it. And so it's been really, really interesting to see the role of youth in businesses like mine, and I'm sure like a lot of yours. And so that's no joke. That's not something to underestimate. I think it's something to really, really dig into and understand, and then to just fan those flames and let these kids figure out how to get food to market. They're incredibly good at it if they're interested. Next slide. Here's some pretty logos of existing First Nations food brands that are in the market right now. And I don't, I don't want to, I don't want to get too into the weeds on marketing, but you can imagine that behind the design and the font and the colors of these food brands, that there was a team of people really thinking about what they want to convey with the logo, with the tagline. This is very important work, and it's not the topic of today's conversation. I'm not that kind of marketing expert, but I would strongly recommend that you invest some money to get professional branding and marketing advice around. It might seem like a little thing, but this logo is going to carry the story. It's going to open the doors. It's going to keep customers coming back. It's not just a pretty picture. It's really worth investing in getting somebody to help figure somebody with experience in choosing these elements, these brand elements, so that it attracts the attention of your target customer. And defining who your target customer is, beyond your own family or your own community, that's a job in and of itself. And it's really, really important. And then once it's done properly, once you know who the target customer is, and you've got the brand and the logo that carries this very subtle information about the story behind it, it makes the job of getting product positioned into any of those sales channels, it makes it much, much easier. Um, Next slide, please. Yeah, so what does Indigenous-led mean? This is I just can't stop looking at this list of values that the fine folks at Bridge to Land, Water, Sky came up with. People these days you go to the store, you buy a loaf of bread, whatever. I just need it because my kids want toast for breakfast tomorrow. That maybe we look at the ingredients list, hoping that there's not too many preservatives in it. Maybe, we're looking for whole grain or, a different sourdough or whatever, but these are all really two-dimensional features and benefits that it gets you full, feeds your meal, it tastes like what you want it to, but there's just so much more depth in this list of, um, product attributes, and I don't want to dilute the importance of all these things. It's just an incredible amount of added value that an Indigenous-led food brand can bring to consumers, all of which, there is a growing amount of interest in. I think I think of sort of the degrowth movement or the regenerative movement, or what do they call it, post-industrial corporate, people that are sort of against just the corporate greed, the massive profits, the growing income like this is essentially what relationships before business means. And there's just incredible interest around the world and very, very few opportunities for people to vote with their dollars for projects that are investing in youth while they're raising food, for smaller scale projects that aren't having the same impact on the broader environment as what modern agricultural production is. There's just really a lot here, and so it's just this is all just to say, like, don't undersell um, the brand. In the brand exercise, these are the kinds of attributes that you would be using to determine what the target customer is, how you get to them, and how you want to get the story told and then portrayed in the branding. Next slide, please. And so that all kind of distills down into your marketing claim. And again, it's not, I mean, it might be certified organic. There's nothing wrong with certified organic, but there's a lot more here than what certified organic actually means when you see it on a package. Your marketing claim is going to be, in a direct to consumer supply chain, your marketing claim is the story of your farm and all the features and benefits that go along with it. And there's, these multiple layers. It's impossible to predict what price you can charge for that. Like, I can't, economists can't just say, if you do these things, you're going to get triple the price of regular loaf of bread from Dempster's. Like, it's not that clear cut. There will be a premium, but it doesn't necessarily all shake out in the wash until you've developed that customer base, and most importantly, built the supply chain, the processing, and the transportation, and the marketing and distribution. That's what we're going to talk about next. So this is maybe where it goes from, yay, there's so much opportunity here, to, oh, this is going to be really hard. Next slide. Right, so regulations. So if you're hunting or just killing animals for your own use, you don't need to have a provincial meat inspector on site. But any meat that's sold commercially has to, and that just means even if you sell a pack of steaks to your neighbor for $25, like, technically that's not allowed unless that animal had a meat inspector on site witnessing the slaughter. And so there's generations of reasons why there's so many regulations behind this. But for example, when we had mad cow disease outbreak, I think it was 2003, it's called BSE, and it's a terrible disease, and there was a few cases in Canada, and it caused all the export markets for beef to be closed. So all of a sudden, all the beef produced in Canada had to be sold within Canada, and it had to comply with a whole new set of regulations that were introduced just to avoid any risk of that disease being transferred from the meat to a consumer. And so what that means is that the heads have to be disposed of entirely, because the BSE, the disease, is carried in brain tissue, and it also can be transported to other parts of the animal through the spine. So animals that are over 3 years old are not, they have to be cut up differently in order to avoid any risk of the spine having transferred the disease to the rest of the animal. we haven't had BSE in almost 25 years. It was a very short-lived risk and outbreak, yet we will live with these inspection regulations related to that one health risk probably for a very long time. But the good news is these are relatively lenient. If these parts of the animal are going to be held back for indigenous projects or like for ceremonial use, for example, what you see in the picture here are a couple of bison hides that I was able to get from the abattoir to the one farm in Manitoba that still does hide tanning. They use a chemical tan, there's an organic tan. None of this is the traditional way of doing it, but that also hasn't been done here. These hides were kept by the abattoir. I had to get them out of there like within hours after the animals were slaughtered because that abattoir wouldn't do the tanning for me. I had to get them driven an hour away, and they've only been salted. So now they will not rot until such time as we can get the hide tanning workshop that we're planning, until we can get that set up and organized. So they're just here in storage, but it's a huge opportunity for like leather crafting, any kind, like there's any all that kind of stuff. There's huge demand at farmers markets and in boutique retail. So it's not just the food, that there's any of the byproducts for pet treats, for example. Sometimes we take organs that we can't sell, and they'll get dehydrated and repackaged for little pet treats. So like beef kidney pet treats, and positioning that product as a single ingredient pet treat, and $34 they fly off the shelf. So there's also we only did it once, but we were able to get the skulls from these bison uh, into a community for ceremonial purpose. And so I asked the guy at the abattoir, I said, okay, I've got some friends and they want to come and pick up the skulls. Would that be okay? And he said, nope, nope, nope. Nobody can take the skulls. The skulls all have to go in the garbage. And I said, wait, there's no way it's going to be consumed. It's just for an indigenous, like, spiritual ceremony. Would that be okay? I said, just check with your inspector and see if you see if that'll be okay. And it was a quick yes. So when it comes to sort of Indigenous community use, a lot of these rules are in a gray area that the provincial inspectors, they don't want to make it hard, right? They don't want to be seen as making it look hard. They don't actually want to make it hard. They understand that there's different uses in different communities. So don't be afraid to ask for exactly what you want from your local butcher. And basically that you may find a butcher that can take the whole animal, kill it, cut it, wrap it, save all these parts, but more than likely you're going to have the animal slaughtered in one place, and then the halves or the quarters will be sent to another place to be cut and wrapped. And then maybe we'll get into the packaging next slide. Yeah, so then when you get the inventory of all the ground beef and sausages, whatever, you've got all the different parts. You have to carry it in an inventory that has um, a permit to handle food. There's a few different types of permits. I used to have a food handling permit, but for packaged foods only. Now I have a meat hawker's permit. Get the public health officer to your site to just take a look around, talk to you about what you're trying to do, what you're going to be doing in the space. They'll ask you for some forms to be filled out and to draw some maps. And they can be really, really helpful. Um, and then they'll issue a permit, and then on an annual basis, they'll come back and audit. So I think now we're into our another break, which is good because I need to drink water, and I'll pass it over to Megan again.
Okay, so our next bridge break, we're going to test a little bit of a memory and also, again, just what you think for listing the steps in order that need to be taken to bring your food to market from 1 to 4. Okay, public health officer visit for 1, permit issued for 1. Okay, changing a little bit now. We've got permit issued seems to be on the top of the list for first thing you need to do so far. Oh, changing food handler safety course now for number one. Permit issued. Changing again. Annual audit seems to be staying at the bottom for number four. Okay, nice. Lots of different answers here. Food handler safety course seems to be sticking with first on the list. Awesome. Okay, cool. I think, yeah, that looks good. We've got food handler safety course, permit issued for number two, public health officer visit, and then annual audit, the last step so far, it looks like.
This is an interesting one because the food handler safety course could really go anywhere. I mean, you just basically can't sell food unless somebody within the organization has it. So I, of course, made my 17-year-old son take it because I just didn't have time. And so it was like an 8-hour course. You can often find these food handler safety courses offered in rural communities. I think they're also offered online. It's like, think of it like driver's ed. It's just one of those, it's about temperature and about, all the best practices in handling food and keeping it safe. Not the most interesting course you'll ever take, but they will ask if you have it. And so when you get to the farmers market point, you may be visited by a public health inspector who's not the same as the one who comes and visits your place of business. The farmers markets have their own set of food safety inspectors who will show up randomly and go around to different tables that are selling food and ask them for things like their food handling permit if they need one. Now, this is interesting. In some provinces, you are not allowed to sell eggs at the farmers market, but in other provinces, you are. Um, Jams, preserves do not need to be prepared in a commercial kitchen. That's a separate kind of food handling permit. Um, Commercial kitchens do not get inspected outside the city of Winnipeg, but they are inspected inside the city of Winnipeg. I'm just kind of rattling off these examples so that you can get a sense as to the nonsense and that, like, and I don't mean to be critical, but like there's not a lot of sense and sensibility in how these regulations are applied. There's not a lot of consistency. So it's really tough to kind of know what to inspect unless you know what to expect, unless you have a really good open line of communication with the inspector who matters most, which is, your local public health food handling inspector who can provide you with all the information that you need, all kinds of great answers to tough questions, and some predictability in how the regulations are going to be, a fit or not a fit for your particular project. Okay, next slide. So tools of the trade here on the right, we have a legal for trade scale. Um, Scales are federally inspected in Canadian agriculture because there is a history of misrepresentation on the part of the commercial buyers in between. So if you're a grain buyer, there's little, kind of tricks that they can use or used to use back in the day of making a truckload of grain seem lighter than it is because everything is paid by weight. And same thing if you're selling meat and you have, like, roasts is a really good example. When you get all your chuck roasts and blade roasts and eye of round, all those cut up, you'll tell the butcher I want them to be between 3 and 4 pounds, but this is not a perfect size. They're just gonna, chop it up, wrap it up, and then you're gonna end up with some roasts that are 2.2 pounds and some that are 4.8 pounds, and you can't price them the same without losing money or charging too much. So meat is sold by the weight. It is actually required that you display the weight along right on the price sticker as well as some other information. And all of that information is programmed into that scale, which then weighs the pack. And then you hit the button and a little sticker comes out. That's the thing that's on the bottom right hand corner. That sticker was generated by that scale. And it knew what price to put on it because I programmed boneless, skinless chicken breasts into the scale at a certain price. So this is a scary amount of setup. This is the scale is a great tool. Anytime you can make your meat packs look more like what grocery store meat looks like, it's gonna be pleasing to your customers. They like paper wrapped meat, but they also like to take a look at the meat before they buy it. People's habits around purchasing meat are very all over the place, but we're still living in a world where they're going to be more comfortable purchasing meat that looks like we're trying to basically create a category here for people to avoid buying meat in the grocery store. Lots of people want that, but at the last minute if they can get a little scared, right? So I took the leap. This scale cost $2,000 and no amount of frustration to try to get it working properly. I wouldn't even say that I've got it fully working properly yet, because the nutrition facts table is also a nice thing to have on your sticker. It's not required in all sales channels, and it doesn't even really mean anything, but again, it just makes that pack look more like what people find in the grocery store, and then it's a lot easier for them to feel comfortable buying it. Yeah, so paper versus plastic, again, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. People like paper, like butcher paper, just because it feels more natural. But on the other hand, it's also cheaper, and compared to plastic, which creates more waste potentially if it can't be recycled, which that's going to differ by province as well. But the thing with vacuum sealed packs, might sound like a nerdy little detail, like who cares, but it resulted in about 30% waste of my inventory in the first year. I had all the meat that I was carrying. I bought it vacuum sealed in plastic, cut and wrapped, and then I marked it up, sold it. And in the process of taking delivery of boxes of frozen vacuum sealed meat packs, 30% of them got jostled around too much, resulting in it just can be the most minuscule perforation in that vacuum seal, and the air gets in, and then you can see this in the grocery store. If a vacuum sealed pack of meat has lost its seal, you can see that the plastic is pulled away from the meat, and very quickly you start to get freezer burn and frost on the inside, and these packages just look horrible. So we don't sell them. So 30% of that of my inventory that first year went straight into my own freezer and straight onto my own family's kitchen table, which is not the worst thing in the world, but you gotta be that it wasn't okay for the business, right? Like, you can't have 30% loss when you're charging maybe a 10 or 15% margin. Like, it was a bad thing. So that's the biggest thing to really watch if you're gonna go with plastic vacuum sealed packs, is the loss. And then beyond that, you just kind of have to talk to your customers about it. And so, what do you want to see this stuff wrapped in? That can be really informative. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I mean, this is my farmer's market table. Those are the dog treats right in the middle in the paper bags. I've got pork tallow in the white tubs on top. That's a really good example of waste. Like, raising pigs on pasture is a very different thing than how pork is raised in industrial confined animal feeding industrial barns. Modern pigs were bred to gain the most amount of weight possible while they're living in a crate that's literally the size of that table. um, it's a very industrial environment, so those animals literally won't run out of the barn if it's on fire. Heritage variety pork, like, really where pork thrive, is in a forest. They want to be in the bush. They want to root around and get all that good stuff underneath the forest floor. They do a really good job on pasture, of turning over a pasture so that a crop can be planted on it. So the pigs have a very functional purpose in an outdoor grazing type of a farm plan. But they have to be heritage breeds. We have to go back to the Tamworth and the Berkshire, these old pigs, and they tend to be really fatty. So, like, on a 220-pound pig, I got a bag of fat that was 80 pounds. And so I was like, oh, what am I going to do with this? Like, it wasn't even bacon. It was just fat with little bits of meat in it. So I gave it to the butcher, and he rendered it down into lard. And so lard is the pork version of beef tallow. And both of these fats are growing in demand for people on a carnivore diet. They can also be rendered into soaps and some natural skincare products. At the farmers market where I sell, my neighbors are selling, pork tallow based products or sorry, beef tallow based candles, and it just flies off the shelf. There's a whole group of customers who've got babies with skin conditions or their own issues, then they can literally only use products that are animal protein based on their own skin. Everything else is reactive. But that's a really great way to take 80 pounds of junk, which is how I first looked at this bag of pork, and turn it into something kind of pretty and nice that can meet a purpose. And that's probably the funnest part of doing, sort of a direct to consumer meat business, is discovering along the way all the ways that we can please people. So like I've got vegetables up there that I raised some of them. I carried some from another farm and made almost no money on the vegetables, but they look pretty. And that's a thing that you get to play around with too, is at the farmers market is where you figure out like what attracts people to your table, and then what attracts people to your brand. Right in the middle, it's kind of hard to see. I've got some of those stickers made up with my farm's logo on it and some samples of pepperoni sticks and stuff. And ultimately then we're also trying to, if I can get somebody to engage in a conversation, I'll try to get their email so that I can get them on my email newsletter list. And that is a critical marketing piece that you need to be on top of, along with social media posts, so that you're always in people's faces with your story, which they will forget maybe 10 seconds after they walk away from the table. But maybe they'll take a sticker and put it on their laptop, and it'll give, any kind of, maybe they'll buy a pack of pepperoni sticks, which are, kind of shelf stable, and they'll feel comfortable. I can get that home. It's not going to melt. But I've got also that little freezer on the left-hand side. It's just like a cooler size, but it's a freezer inside. And I take that full of frozen packs of meat. And so it's just giving people as many options as possible to engage with the brand. But what I really want is to get people buying online so that I can get the volume, the throughput of my business up to the point where I can then start selling into restaurants, which I'm going to do next, and then small retail. Next slide. This is just an example of what the online ordering page looks like. I hate ordering online. Like, I think I've ordered off of Amazon once. I don't know how or why people do this, but I need to figure it out, because it's just making the products flow on your ordering page in a way that people can navigate and then ultimately put in their cart. That's where this is where you're gonna see the biggest expansion and growth. Like, farmers market dollar sales are gonna be pretty small. This is where you can 10x that, to the point where you can then maybe justify, renting a freezer truck or some of the other higher cost supply chain logistics. Next. And yeah, restaurants and grocery stores are, restaurants are next for me, because I recognize that the like roast chickens, for example, raised on pasture, moved regularly, so they're always getting that fresh diet. They're these big, thick chickens. They're like literally a chicken breast will be twice the size of something that you would find in the grocery store. And then the texture, it's just like there actually is texture. It doesn't feel like tofu in your mouth like most chicken breasts do. And the complexity of the flavor is a proxy for the nutrient density in the plant mixture, which is a function of the healthy soil biology and all the nutrient cycling that's happening between the ground through the plants. And then it ultimately ends up in that animal system, and it presents itself as a more complex, better flavor. It's a richer flavored chicken. So I'm going to go to these restaurants and tell them that story and just ask, like, why wouldn't you carry this chicken as opposed to whatever you're getting from Cisco? And if they don't want it, they don't want it. I only have 40 to sell before the next batch comes in June anyway. But I'm ready to have that conversation now, because I think maybe one restaurant could use 40 chickens, and then they can test it. They can put stuff on features. They can they can tell the story right to their customers that are sitting at the table, who are stuck there, by the way. If they don't want to pay $48 for this roasted chicken from the pasture, blah, 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 if they don't want to pay for that, they're going to be embarrassed walking out, or they're going to have to buy something else that they don't want as much. But I mean, I hope that doesn't sound sort of tricky, but it just helps to be able to find a customer base at this stage that's just going to pay the price you need to charge in order to make a margin on the business. Like that's just the brass tacks. You got to get a margin, and the costs of this meat are a lot higher. If I didn't have free labor, we wouldn't be here. And every farmer that does direct to consumer marketing will tell you the same thing. There's a number of years where everybody's working for free just because it's either fun, or you're passionate about it, or somebody has an off-farm job. It's more expensive than grocery store meat, and restaurants are in a good position to be able to monetize the story on top, and to be able to effectively and fully communicate all those features when you get to the point where you can get somebody else to do that besides yourself at the farmer's market. The grocery stores that you want to talk to are the ones that are bringing in your target customers. So again, this is important to invest in defining that target customer persona at the beginning, so that by the time you get to grocery stores, you'll be able to tell when you walk in if your target customer is in there or not. And it'll be the store itself that will have done the work to curate the types of foods into its little boutique niche store in some fancy neighborhood, probably, that is attracting the target customer. But there's not to say that by no means is it just wealthy people that eat premium food. Not at all. We have customers from every demographic. It's just that they're more, most of them are going to be more attracted to online sales or home delivery. And the sales channel that you can tap into in a grocery store is a bit more specific. Next slide. Okay, well, I'm only 10 minutes over time at least now. Sorry, everyone, but this is the wrap-up slide, I think. And it's just that's concludes everything I wanted to cover about direct marketing meat. And like I said, I wanted to get as granular as possible and as specific as possible with some of these little nuances, because it took me 3 years to get to this point, and I'm probably still 2 years away from having it be where it needs to be in order to become a long-term sustainable distribution business. And so the more there's nobody's competing with anybody here. Like, the more you can connect with other small D2C brands like me, or like, everyone's going to have a different story, a different context. But there's so much sharing that is possible and that is beneficial. Just really, reach out to, man, maybe it's through Bridge to Land, Water, Sky, to be able to connect some of these individuals. We really would love to hear from anybody who's on this journey already. It's an opportunity to just really connect the land, community, and then off reserve customers in a really beautiful way. There's not a lot of good things that I have to say about how modern agriculture is treating lands, and it's tragic what it does to the waterways and to bird populations, and the list goes on and on and on and on. But thanks to this project, now we can see ways to start regenerating and to start fixing these relationships, and to be testing out new ways to just use lands respectfully, and testing out different options, asking different questions, and doing all this knowledge sharing along the way, is really quite a beautiful thing. So next slide. I think there might be one or two more just housekeeping slides here, but here's the core partners. And then I think we're good to just get into questions. So thanks so much for your attention. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. I don't know where the time went. I kind of get lost in my head when I get talking about how fun and complicated this work has been. But yeah, I just really hope that was helpful, and look forward to answering any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much for such an informative presentation, Brenda. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. So I think, yeah, we'll move to the questions now. I think we did have one earlier in the chat, which I think you kind of did address while you were going through, Brenda. I'll just repeat it if you have anything else you wanted to add on that, but I do think you did a good job in the presentation of covering it. The question was, what do you think of producers working together in a cooperative to ensure their product is year-round?
Oh, yeah, that's uh, that would be a great application for the next Living Lab project. It's all things are possible. Uh, there not all things are possible. Obviously, that's not right. And I answered that question the way that I did because I really don't want to gloss over any of this stuff. Like it is absolutely true that there is a dearth of successful cooperatives in this country. Like even if you look at Federated Cooperatives Limited, like the co-op, right, that runs all the hardware stores, grocery, they had all kinds of dissension between their head office and their branches and their local boards and people branching off. Like it kind of looks like just the next co-op to lose its mind and get off track in Canadian agriculture. So I just can't ignore the fact that that business model has not worked. That being said, First Nations communities getting together and doing something under that type of a business structure, I've never seen that tried. Maybe that's the way to unlock that kind of collaborative spirit that farmers always start with, and then somehow it just maybe that's yeah. That's just been my experience though. So I see there's maybe another question.
Yes. Next question. What are the main barriers to the success of cooperatives, I guess?
I'm sorry, you cut out there. To the success of what?
Of cooperatives.
One member, one vote. That's it right there. Because people also have a shareholder mentality, and maybe the expectations aren't always set right at the beginning. But ultimately, what happens is different individual members of the co-op have a different financial stake in the outcome. And so then they can expect preferential treatment. If they have made, say, more grain that they're delivering to the elevator, then they should get a better price of grain to the cooperative elevator. And then that gets, gossiped about. And then people get mad at each other. And then they start having political arguments about what's fair and what's right. And then you're just wasting your time on stupid arguments, and the business is being managed poorly because people are more focused on the political dynamics and these philosophical questions rather than are we making more money than we're spending here. And that's basically the story of the Prairie Pool elevators, like Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba Pool. It took them 80 years, but they all kind of dissolved under that kind of same pattern. But yeah, I believe that the problem with co-ops is the mismatch between an individual member's financial stake. And that could just be like, I'm running 500 cows and somebody else is running 50 cows. They shouldn't have the same number of votes on the board as I do, or they shouldn't have the same number of votes as a co-op member as I do. But the principle of the co-op, and it's literally written into the Cooperatives Act in each province, is one member, one vote. So I hope that makes sense. I could be wrong. I just kind of made that up, but I've got a bit of experience studying it.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, we have another question here. Are there any Indigenous owned and on-reserve slaughter options being investigated to avoid some difficult regulations mentioned? I'm not sure if you can see that.
Sorry, but you just cut out again on.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll repeat myself. Hopefully it works better. Are there any Indigenous owned and on reserve slaughter options being investigated to avoid some difficult regulations mentioned? And then I just not sure if you can speak to that.
Yes. Now I do not. I've not seen them. I've just heard about them, and I could be wrong on this, but Sandy Hook First Nation in Western Manitoba and another one that's close to Cypress River. Um, those are just two examples, but Assiniboine Community College in Brandon is the one to ask that question of. because they've either done the training, um, like the butcher training, or they've been directly involved in construction. But yes, there are a number of on-reserve slaughter options that have been designed. Have they been successful, effective? I feel like it's pretty early days with trying to do this. I just recently learned about the Bison Trust, and I'm going to completely mess up my explanation of it, but my understanding is there's a lot of new herds being developed in communities, and that there's a pathway of more and more communities having their own bison herds, and that's brand new, right? Or it takes a while for those herds to be disseminated and expanded. So as a result, I don't think that there are very many First Nations communities that have their own on reserve slaughter and cut and wrap facilities, or if they do have them, it might not be for their own animals or so much as for hunted animals, or because there really is not a lot of access to live animals to get into reserves for processing, its own community's meat consumption. Like Maple Leaf and other companies are so vertically integrated. Like if you don't know a farmer that's raising some of these heritage pigs outside, I don't know where you go to buy baby pigs. Like honestly, it's all completely end-to-end controlled by corporations. And the same can be said of supply managed commodities. And beef is much easier, obviously, but it's like I said, it's been tricky up until this point, but yes, there are examples, and Assiniboine Community College has a lot of good information about that. They run a 2-year butchering program, and the first year is sort of slaughter and breaking down the big parts of the animal. And the second year, they actually run a butcher shop in Brandon where second year students are there, like on the front line running the store. And so I've talked to them also about the First Nations project specifically. And I can't remember the guy's name, but I'm sure you can track him down there.
Awesome. Okay, and Tom Harrison has his hand up. I don't know if you want to speak on your question or if it's a comment.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks, Brenda. I'm slow at typing here, so I didn't want to put anything in the chat. Anyways, thanks. Thanks. I thought your presentation was really good. It resonated well with us. My wife and I are sitting here. We wear a number of different hats, and like a lot of it resonated, right from disdain for Costco to problems with vacuum packaging. But uh, one of the things that I've noticed, I work with some First Nations here over the last few years, probably 20 years, I guess. What I'm seeing is a point you made, one, managing the land consistent with the First Nation values. And what I'm hearing from these guys is, number one is the cultural relationship with bison, and two is the food security. Feeding their community is probably more important than the actual marketing to off reserve type things. And it's more of a comment, but any thoughts on that when developing, like a bison type product from a reserve or First Nations?
Well, my first thought is that it would be a lot easier than trying to comply with all the commercial marketing regulations that I just went through. And the reason why I focused on that is because I I believe there's a market for it, in off reserve communities. That's not to say it's the best option for for marketing this type of food. And by this type of food, I mean, bison that are raised on the land. Like if 100% of the herd could be consumed by the community that raised it, um, that's going to be the easiest, probably the most fun. It wouldn't maybe create as many jobs. So I guess like what I would always start with is asking, what are the goals of the community? Like, is it economic development? Is it cultural, spiritual, support? Is it food security? So depending on what those goals are or where they rank, would then maybe determine whether you need to go off reserve with any of the meat or not. But geez, if you don't have to, I don't know about why you would. I mean, I think it's just nerds like me that like hanging around at the farmer's market talking to people about food all day. Like I I've got a lot of curiosity and patience for the spreadsheet work and of pricing and, you know, product sizing and all that stuff. And I've got a whole bunch of farmer direct marketers that I work with that are there kind of helping me answer the questions that I don't know. But it's a heavy lift, and I don't want to sugarcoat that, but at the same time, there's a great market opportunity. It just, you know, what the right size of the project and end game is for everyone to kind of discern on their own, I think. And by that I mean the landholders and those
Yeah,
that
exactly. Like what I'm seeing is that's almost the first thing that we have to do is pay attention to what they want. You know, if it's their idea, they'll probably stick with it. If we impose something that we think is best for a First Nation, then typically doomed to failure.
Okay, I think we will wrap up the question and answer period now. Thank you so much to everyone who did ask a question. Thank you to Brenda for those awesome answers. And if you do have any other questions, you can send those to bridgetolandwatersky.com, or sorry, at gmail.com, and we will send them to Brenda and she can give an answer for those. Yeah, so thank you so much to everyone who attended today. Thank you to Brenda for an awesome presentation again. You can sign up for Brenda's twice weekly emails following the QR code there or through her website. Follow Bridge to Land Water Sky as well if you feel up to it. Sign up for our newsletter. We have a podcast out now, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. For anyone who joined late, and to everyone actually, we will be sending out a recording of the presentation along with a short survey, hopefully tomorrow, so you can look out for that as well. Otherwise, I think that's it. Thank you again, and have a great day to everybody.